Okay, I'm going to use my PowerPoint to talk about this two question. Oh, I would just use recent implementation, recent. Okay, question number one is that what do I mean by integrating web report? Okay, that is the first question I like to address. So I like to use this PowerPoint so we can actually see what I'm doing here. Okay, so so when we talk about, this is really number one, I want to say that what is JSON RPC? So JSON RPC is essentially you have a two piece of program. One piece of program we can call it temporarily hw3 client, and but this could include both hw3 client.cpp and and the shadowfly .cpp or shadowperson.cpp, but they kind of link together, is called hw3 client. And the other program, which is receiving the request from remote, I temporarily call it hw3server, but this could be also be hw3another. So it's any program that's actually receiving the call from the client, and that's I temporarily call it hw3server, hw3 client. Okay, so when you make a call, it's really like this. I'm going to bring this up. So you actually submit a call this direction, and then it is going to be returned back to you. Sorry, let me actually see how this will work. Okay, so there is a call. So basically, when the call is actually a JSON, so I'm going to use a representation. This I call it I'm going to call it J1. Okay, I call it J1. Maybe I just call it J1. It might be easier. Okay. So basically, when you call the function, you're going to submit the J1 from the client side. In terms of code, this is likely to be in shadow underscore fly.cpp and hw3 client.h. By the way, there are two functions. I'm going to write it down. This is actually in between the collaboration between most likely shadow fly or shadow person, but I'm just using shadow fly as an example, and also hw3 client.h. Okay, so between those two programs, they're actually deliver this JSON to the server. So the server is going to receive it, and when they receive it, it's actually also being handled by what I will call it hw3server.cpp, and also a bit of code is in fact in hw3server.h. Okay, this two pieces of code, and they got it. And this JSON is delivered over here. So when I receive it, I will call it J2. So after J2 is processing, it's going to prepare a return. A return I'm going to call RJ J3, but because of the return, I call it J3R. So that was the return JSON. Why there's, okay, now he's happy. Okay, so J3R is the return. And when the clients receive is actually getting this is called return as well, R4J. So essentially J1 and J2 are identical, supposed to be identical. And J3 and J4, J3R and J4R, they're identical. So what I'm saying is that any RPC call, this is for any RPC call that you're going to have this 4JSON being produced for each of the calls. So essentially, in your program, if you make, say, 20 calls, then each call has 4 JSON, you're going to have 80 JSON, if you count it this way, 80 JSON being produced. And each of the JSON is going to be reported to the web report. So in other words, I'm going to draw a picture like this. So the whole thing over here, I'm actually going to put change a different color. Let's make a different color, yellow, and send it back. Okay, the whole thing here is actually client. No, I don't want to do this. This is, I call WR client, web report client. Let me change the color to be a red. So this is actually, regardless where you are, you're representing the role of the client. And then the other side is this, of course, is hw3server. I'm going to look at this. And currently, this web server's URL is 169.237.6.102, and then with port number 8300. And I will just use the whole URL, HTTP. Okay, so that's the server we're talking about. And in this piece of code, you develop the yellow pieces, and then you actually, your code is going to talk to the code that we provide in our server is called client. So essentially, I'm going to draw 4 arrows, and this arrow is from the JSON. And for each of the call, you should have this 4 arrow. Okay, so this is a 4 arrow. I'm going to draw it. The first arrow is actually from J1 over here. Of course, I want to change the color a little bit. Let me see how I can do this nicely. I want to put a much heavier weight. I want to change the color to be bright red, and I want to change it to be dash. Okay, so that's number 1. And here's number 2. And then number 3. And number 4. So essentially, in the web report server, that you're actually going to see this 4. We can actually go back to the web report server for you to actually really check the result. How do I get rid of this? Yeah, okay. All right, so you can see that it's as a client for each call, there will be 1, 2, 3, 4 of them coming in. And the other thing is that we require, because we want to know this is really you. Hold on. And so therefore, wait a minute, how do I actually switch back? I click something, which okay, here. You have to add your VSID here. The only thing that's different between the JSON that you passing each other is you have to plus your VSID. Okay, over here, and then that's the complete. Okay, so that's what I meant integrating web report, means that you have to insert the code that I gave you on WR client and WR server, but mostly it's in WR client because WR server is here. You don't need to do anything about handling those. You just need to worry about how do you actually submit it. So it's a WR client code into each of the function from both the client side and the server side, so you can actually prepare this for JSON and submit to the other. Okay, so now I'm actually going to show you what is the web client looks like. We can actually see this is somebody else's code. We have seen a lot of students already submit such JSON. Let me see, where do I have it here? It's here. Okay, so this is a web report. I'm going to just refresh it. And let's actually see what happened the latest one. Let me make this a little bigger. What happened to my, yeah, see, I don't like this because it's just, okay. Let's actually move to the end. Oh, okay, let's actually take a look at this. So let's take a look at get distance. I saw get distance 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe it's the same. I don't know. Look at this. This is a 1 get distance argument. This is a fly, and this was my JSON. This is one number 1. Let me see if this is client side. There should be 4 of them, and this is the second one. It looks like they're the same. 1, 2, the port number, and then this one is a return distance, number 3 and number 4. So this 4 is 1 call. Let me just mark it, everything here. Starting from here, all the way over here. This 4 JSON, when they make a 1 call, okay, and you have a 2 from the client. You client when they call. This is J1. This is J2. J1 and J2 are identical. And see, the student did it right because he added my VSID. And then you have the reply. Reply, because it's get distance, you're going to get the distance parameter. And that's why you have the distance function result. And then you also have the same VSID. And then you have the VSID. And if you look at the timestamp, their timestamp looks almost identical. Okay, so this 4 was produced when one of the RPC function was called. So by seeing this, we know that the call has been passing the parameter, getting the result correctly. Okay, so that gives you some assurance about your RPC is being worked correctly from the web server perspective. Okay. All right, so that is the first question about what do we mean by integrating the web report. Is there any question about this part from everybody? Anybody?
Yeah, so for the report that you just showed us, was that based off of one execution of Hw3 client? Or do we have to execute multiple times?
It's not just by one execution of the Hw3 client, but also one function call within that Hw3 client. Because Hw3 client could make a multiple of such call.
Okay.
And for each of the call, I want to emphasize for each of the call, you need to have 4 JSON. Let me actually tell you, sometimes it could be one call triggering multiple call. For example, if somebody make a conflict of interest is going to trigger operator equal equal. And operator equal equal is going to trigger get VSID. So potentially just conflict of interest, you're triggering 3 call. And each one is 4, so you've got 12 of them. So get distance is probably simpler because get distance won't trigger others. But conflict of interest is going to trigger equal equal. Equal equal is likely to trigger get VSID. If the get VSID itself become a shadow call, then you're going to have that extra JSON being delivered to web report. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Any other question? Any other, before I move on to the second question from anyone here? Okay, so
Sorry, Professor.
sure, go ahead, Joseph.
Sorry, I have a question. So I, after I did connected to the web report, after I did the web reporting, it turns out I web reported 14 times. I was wondering if that's the incorrect number, because it seems that it's like 4 at a time, so it'd be like, I guess, divisible by 4.
Right.
From
So it should be multiplied of 4. If you only have 14, my guess is that one of the function you forgot to report 2 of them, or your function call failed. The most likely cases is that call failed, itself failed. So only the input side was reported, but the return side has not been reported. So it means that your return, maybe you need to check on the return side. I mean, most likely, in fact, I want to tell you that, Joseph, that even if the call failed, you should still report failed, right, to the caller, and therefore it still need to report. So even if for example, something failed, you should still have 4. So you want to investigate where are those 2 missing. My feeling is that it could be missing on either input side or output side, or it could missing on the either client side or server side. For example, the client actually report both of them, and the server, that particular function, it didn't report. So you might want to check which side you are missing. Are you missing the client side or missing the server side? So let me actually tell you a trick, Joseph, that you can actually do. So here you can see that these 2 are identical, right? These 2 are identical. So you actually didn't know whether that's from the client or from the server. Of course, we can guess that this is from the client, this is from the server. But when one of these 2 are missing, that you don't know which one is missing. So what you can do, this is totally doable, that inside this web report in your JSON, because this JSON is controlled by you, if you can add your MyVSID, you can also add, say, index, say J1, and index, say J2, index J3R, index J4R. So when there's a report coming over here, you can actually see which one has been reported, which one has not. This will help you to do that as well. The nice thing about JSON is that you can always extend whatever the new element or key value pair into the JSON, and the program will semantically will still work. If you notice that the way handling JSON is that if you have an extra field, it's usually okay. And I just don't know how to handle it, but somebody else might. Okay, so you can actually add that for your debugging, and then you can try to identify which one or which ones were missing. And from there, you can actually look at your code, okay?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, if you cannot find a bug, let us know, okay? And also, so everybody else have a similar problem, like you missing some JSON being sent to the web report server. Okay, so can I, I'm going to move to question number 2, okay?
Can I ask one more question about that? So are you saying like that every function has their own like JSON 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yeah, every function has that. I mean, every function must have 4 JSON, right? Must have 4 JSON, you need to send it over there. I mean, let me just give you a very quick example, okay? So if you look at the, if you look at hw3 client.h, okay, if you look at hw3 client.h, let's just look at get distance. This is a get distance function. And you see, this is a JSON value P. That's the first J. This is the J1 I'm talking about, P. And this is the JSON, how they put the element together, and then they just call method. So P is J1, and then the result is J4, J4R, okay? J1, J4R. So you see that in your code, there's two JSONs already there. You just need to report them to the web report. Okay.
And the one that goes, the two that go to the server are 2 and 3, right?
It's basically from the server side of the get distance. When you receive the call, you're actually going to receive a JSON. It's not JSON, but it's the JSON equivalent information. You need to turn that parameter back to a JSON, just like the way they actually put this parameter into a JSON. You actually just need to reconstruct that JSON, then you submit to web report. It's not readily for you to pick it up and use it like a JSON. No, you have to put it here, and then for this one, you have to actually add another one, my VSID. You have to add my VSID to get the right JSON. Okay?
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to talk about the second question. So the second question was, what is the difference between hw3server and hw3another? Okay, functionally, they are very similar. I would say they're very similar. I mean, in fact, maybe 95% of the code may be identical. Okay, that's just saying they're very similar. So I'm going to focus on what's the differences. So the difference is the following. There are two major differences you need to worry about. The first difference is that they're hosting different objects. In other words, that say hw3server, my host, real object 1, and then shadow object 2. Okay, just example. And then hw3another is actually hosting real object 2 and shadow object 1. Okay, so it's just basically we're saying that for the real object under Hw3, we assume there's only one copy on the internet. Only one copy on the internet. That's the assumption. And therefore, whether object 1 is hosted by server or another, that's actually the choice of the programmer decide how he's going to placement of the code. So basically, the first difference is functionally they're the same, but the only difference is that where is the real object number 1? Where is this real person P1? Where's this real person P2? And where is the fly object number 1? Where's the fly object number 5? So that is the first major difference. That I actually give a very nice example. I think help even myself to understand. Is like this. I showed this earlier. Now you can see that I actually talk about when you make a call with equal equal, you can see that I actually put this line, location of the real object. I say hw3 server 1 hosts real object person 1, hw3 server 5 that hosts person number 7. I mean, this is essentially, I can say, okay, this one I call it hw3another, and this one I call it hw3 server. I mean, in fact, you don't have to call it hw3another. You can call it hw3 server 1 or server 5 or server 2, whatever name you want to call. But whatever name you call the program, it doesn't matter. The matter is whether that program will hosting different kind of object. In fact, in a real implementation, which you don't really have it now, but once you've done your homework assignment number 5, you realize you can do somewhat differently, because you will realize the source code of hw3 server, hw3another is 100% identical. I was saying they're similar for homework 3, but I didn't say they're identical. But if you done with hw5, homework 5, that this can be identical code. You just need to have a one copy of hw3 server.cpp. And when you execute the program, you're going to ask the program to actually load the object from JSON. Because remember, what is homework 5? Homework 5 is I can convert a C++ object to a JSON. I can convert JSON to the real object. So what I want to say is that, okay, in this scenario, what I'm going to say is that when I actually run hw3 server 1, remember they're the same code. I will ask them to read the file about JSON file for person 1. So I read the person 1 JSON, convert the person 1 JSON to the C++ person 1 real object. So now this program will host person 1. And similarly, I call the other executable. I call hw3 server 5. It's identical. The executable actually is identical. But the parameter I instruct the program to read from the file is different. So hw3 server 5 is going to read the person 7 JSON file. And again, you're going to translate that JSON into C++ person 7 object. And now you can actually run the program over here. So this is kind of want to reinforce this concept that why we have this idea called hw3 another. Because the key thing is they're actually the same. I should probably say that they're similar in homework 3. Second. They're identical in homework 3, but they will be the same for after homework 5. When you can do this JSON and C++ one-to-one mapping like what I talked about yesterday. Okay, that's the first difference, is just hosting the project. And the second difference, I think either Nathan or Joseph already pointed out, the difference is that their URL is different. Because URL is essentially how you're going to communicate with the server. So hw3 server, hw3another, they might have a different URL. So for example, I could have hw3 server, this HTTP, I would say cloud 123.google.net, and then port number 8384. And then I can say hw3 another HTTP. I would say aws.amazon.com colon 9123. Okay, I can actually have a definition looks like this. So basically, in order to access the server, that you're actually going to use two different URL. So right now, the URL in Hw3 was actually hard-coded in your code. That's why it's 95% similarity. Means that you have to edit your code to actually change the URL. But in the future, that you can perfectly done this through argc and argv. For the input argument, you can actually have a one of the argument with the URL, and such that your code will still be identical. You don't need to develop another version of code. Okay, so I would say these are the two main differences between hw3 server and hw3another. Okay, any question? Anybody? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just stop recording.